Welcome to the Backyard Professor Esoteric Studies. Once again, I have some very intriguing information on Tolkien and his materials, especially from this new book that I'm in, J.R.R. Tolkien, The Nature of Middle-earth, edited by Carl Hostetter, one of the gentlemen whom Christopher Tolkien, who is J.R.R.'s son, who gave us the history of Middle-earth in the 12 volumes, tremendous insights into the entirety of Tolkien's work. This is technically considered the 13th volume of that. I want to share some information on this, but first I have found a few interviews of Hostetter from various different YouTube sites. This was about 4 years ago. The book has been out for about 5 years, 4 to 5 years. And I want to share some of these ideas because of the nature of the work that I am doing with J.R.R. Tolkien's materials. Very intriguing. Let me share this one particular video that I believe has a very intriguing idea. Yes, this one right here.
So this essay in particular makes it quite plain that Tolkien was very familiar with Thomas Aquinas and his metaphysics. Mm-hmm. And I point this out in the book. Actually, this is a good point for me to describe something here. In editing this book, my goal was to put Tolkien, front and center wherever possible. Therefore, I had usually minimal introduction. Mm-hmm. Everything Tolkien wrote is given on the page in larger type than any editorial comments that I make. And wherever possible, his footnotes are also given as footnotes on the page. So the reader, if all they want to do is read what Tolkien wrote, you will never have to turn to the back of the chapter, and you don't have to read any notes other than what Tolkien wrote. I try to make it very easy for people, the casual reader, who doesn't care about textual details or my thoughts about things, to just focus on Tolkien's writings. Okay. Now, that being said, there are points where, as the type of editor that I am, and as Christopher Tolkien was, where there are interesting things to note. So, for example, if Tolkien made a significant change to a text at some point, I point that out because some people want to know how Tolkien's thoughts developed while he was working on texts. I also sometimes make linguistic comments. I do a lot of cross-referencing to the history of Middle-earth in particular, and Unfinished Tales. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent within the book, the challenge there was I couldn't provide any page numbers because the page numbers are not set until the final text is there. And I didn't have an opportunity to go back and put in page numbers. So what I do when I'm referring to from one text to another, I'll just say, see chapter 2, text 1 in part 3 of the book, this kind of thing. Then another thing that I've done is for these sort of philosophical, metaphysical matters, theological matters that not everyone will be familiar with. I have created an appendix titled Metaphysical and Theological Themes. So where Tolkien is making reference to some metaphysical or theological concept that may not be obvious to the reader, I provide an endnote and say, go see this entry in the Appendix 1. Now, you do not have to do that. If you're not interested in those matters, you can safely ignore that appendix. If you have any interest in those matters, I do invite you to check out that appendix because I think there's some really interesting insights into Tolkien's thoughts, theological and metaphysical thought.
Now, that to me is exquisite information from the main editor of this particular book of J.R.R. Tolkien manuscripts. In his last year of his life, Christopher Tolkien personally asked Carl Hostetter, would you please take this last corpus of my father's writings and produce a book? And so Hofstadter worked on this book diligently for several years to put it all together. And it is truly magnificent. Now, esoterically, this book just screams delight. And I will produce several videos discussing many of the esoteric and the theological and the spiritual themes in here. Tolkien was a well-read scholar. He was a Catholic his entire life. Knowing that he is familiar with Thomas Aquinas, and in another interview, Hofstadter said that he was very familiar with Aristotle also. This, to me, is pure good, because it broadens and deepens Tolkien away from only being a storyteller to a storyteller who can significantly impact the depth, the breadth, the meaning of a mere story in our lives, so that we can come away from having read, enjoyed Tolkien on one particular level. Who among us hasn't just simply read through him for the story and were completely astounded by it? And yet, when you go back through and you reread the text with care and you begin to ask tough questions, you begin to notice, wait, is that an inconsistency? Is that a contradiction, etc.? I wonder what that particular word in that story was in the Elvish language of Sindarin. When you begin to ask these types of questions and unfold a deeper substrate to Tolkien, you're never disappointed. That's the one thing I love about this. It is the thing I love about this. Hofstadter was true to his word. He gave us J.R.R. Tolkien's thoughts in this text. Now, I personally really appreciate Hofstadter also providing the historical and the manuscript evidence, as well as the linguistic, as well as the metaphysical and theological. Apparently, there were a few people who criticized him for bringing in theology, etc., but Tolkien is the one who did that. I believe it improves the story. It enhances the depth. So from my point of view, this is wonderful. A second clip I would like to truly share with you.
Text.
Mm-hmm.
I won't give things away, but there are definitely surprises.
Yes.
Like Orome was not the only one at Quaviana.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see some familiar names there. Now, keep in mind, of course, these are all late ideas. I don't know that he would have settled on them and incorporated it into the Silmarillion had he actually finished it.
Right.
But it's, to me, that doesn't really matter. What's interesting is that he had the thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to raise the topic of canon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of my upcoming questions. So with Tolkien's writings, with Tolkien's writings, obviously we have Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which are pretty straightforward. But then after that, you get really into just I couldn't imagine the task that Christopher and folks like yourself have taken on to go through all these notes and try to determine what J.R.R. Tolkien would have settled on. So as a fan, how do we look at these writings, and we can refer to Nature of Middle Earth here. How do we look at these and determine what should be considered canon?
I have no idea. To me, canon is anything that Tolkien actually wrote.
Okay.
Published or not.
Yeah.
Now, I know other people have different definitions of canon. I think ultimately everybody has their own personal definition of canon.
Yeah.
They pick the things they like, they ignore the things they don't like. And that's just fine as a fan.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that that's fine if you're doing Tolkien scholarship. But if it's just in terms of appreciating Tolkien's works and the world that he built, ultimately you get to decide what is canon for you and what is not. And you can try to persuade others of your point of view too, of course. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I don't deal with that issue.
That's a great answer.
That is a great answer. I am 100% in line with Hostetter's approach to J.R.R. Tolkien. Regardless of whether it was published or not, it does not matter. If we are to understand the stories, the meanings, the ideas, the incredible depth and complexity of this mega story, which Tolkien worked on his entire life, even after several of the books were published, he continued to rethink those stories, to rethink the timelines, to rethink the languages. The meanings in the languages never stopped evolving. He continually added materials. He continually subtracted materials. And this is part of the joy. This is part of the headache. This is part of the challenge of being a Tolkien scholar, which I am not one yet, but that is my approach. And I wanted to make that crystal clear in what I'm doing, because I am going to write some books on J.R.R. Tolkien. I am in the process of writing them now, I should say. I'll be a little while. It's a lot of work. It's pure joy. It is delightful to jump into the deep end of J.R.R. Tolkien. I was very appreciative that Carl Hostetter indicated that. What this means is when people say, well, my canon is not your canon, etc., they do the same thing with the languages, the Quenya, the Neo-Quenya, the Sindarin, the Neo-Sindarin, etc., and everyone wants their particular language to be the true language, etc., and that simply cannot be. Tolkien never finished any of his languages. And I want to share a couple more ideas that I've researched for this video and read these to you, because I think these are vital. Have you ever noticed that in one of Tolkien's most dramatic first-age tales, Tuor, the future father of Irindil, he actually struggles to understand the Sindarin spoken by the guards of Gondolin. Now, why this is so remarkable is for this reason. Everywhere else in Middle-earth, Sindarin seems perfectly mutual. It's universal. It's easy. So why this difference? Why does Tolkien show Tuor hesitating, even struggling with the speech of the hidden city, and then never mention the linguistic problem again? Now, to most readers, this might look like an inconsistency, but my approach is simply this. This is the key to a hidden truth about Tolkien's world, because Sindarin, like the legendarium itself, was never a finished language. It was alive, changing, rewritten, evolving every time Tolkien sharpened a pencil. The Gondolin dialect moment is one of those magical cracks where the light shines through. We get a glimpse into the workshop where Tolkien's languages and stories were reshaping each other in real time. In the early fall of Gondolin tradition, Tolkien wanted Gondolin to feel truly isolated. It was a hidden sanctuary. It was cut off from the world for centuries. Well, how do you show the isolation? Not by building taller walls, but by letting the language drift. Tuor's moment of confusion is world building through linguistics. It's Tolkien flexing the idea that language evolves differently in hidden places, just as it does in real human history. But as Tolkien rewrote this first age, again and again and again, actually, in fact, he never stopped rewriting it, Sindarin began to play a different role here now. It becomes the common speech of Beleriand, the linguistic bloodstream of the elven world. And so the Gondolin dialect barrier, well, that quietly fades out of the later drafts of the stories that Tolkien kept producing. It's not contradicted. It's just set aside as Tolkien's attention moved to other areas. And this right here is the heart of what I want people to understand. Middle-earth isn't a perfectly polished universe where every detail lines up. It's just not that. It's a living manuscript. It was written over 50 years' length of time and never completed. Languages shift. Races evolve. Names actually change meaning. In Tolkien's story, even the cosmology is rewritten several times in this magnificent epic. So when someone says, but isn't this inconsistent? The deeper truth is far more fascinating than that. Tolkien wasn't documenting a world. He was discovering one. And discovery is messy. It's thrilling, but it's also full of abandoned ideas that leave beautiful fossils behind for us to discover. Tuor's difficulty with the speech of Gondolin is one of those fossils I would propose. It's a moment where we see Tolkien experimenting and he's testing and he's rethinking the whole situation. What we see here is a linguistic snapshot from a version of the world that once existed, and then it transformed into something new later on in Tolkien's thinking. And here's the real aha insight. Every inconsistency you find in Tolkien is actually a doorway into the evolution of Middle-earth. That's why we must handle these languages with care, not because they're fragile, they're not fragile, but because they're alive in a way that no other fantasy languages are. They grow, they branch, there's a lot of twists. There's a lot of merging of ideas. There's contradicted materials, and then there's clarifications of some of those contradictions and changes. Well, this is just like real world languages. Tolkien wasn't showing us a finished world. He was inviting us into a world being made. And the more we understand that, the more the magic deepens. So let's step into that workshop. Let's uncover how Sindarin changed shape through the decades, because this is the language that I'm writing on and that I'm learning. Sindarin is the common spoken tongue that we find mostly in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, the most popular of Tolkien's works, because those were the ones he finished publishing during his lifetime. So Sindarin is the focus. Quenya is the earlier language, coming from the common Eldarin script language, but it's kind of similar to how Latin is related to our language of English, right? So it's not that Sindarin evolved from Quenya. It's just that Sindarin is the spoken, more common speech. This is why I'm focusing on it. The tiny detail, like the dialect drifting Gondolin, these reveal some of the greatest insights into Tolkien's creative process. And this is what I want to document in my books. Because once you understand that Middle-earth was always in motion, suddenly every name, every root, every linguistic mystery becomes part of a grand unfolding drama. Well, welcome to the living language of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Yeah. Even the inconsistencies tell us a story here. The nature of Middle-earth is not just another Tolkien book. This book is the closest thing we will ever get to Tolkien's private late life cheat codes for how Arda really works. This is the book to use, and it's the last of Tolkien's notes. Carl F. Hostetter didn't just edit a scrapbook with this thing. He opened the sealed vault of 1959 to 1973 Tolkien thinking. The final 20 years. Now, it's in this time that Tolkien was tying every loose metaphysical, linguistic, biological, theological, and historical threads together. So what this book really is here, what makes this book so fantastic? This is the Silmarillion Author's Room edition. It's not the published story, but this is how Tolkien himself understood the reality about time and bodies and souls and language and immortality and death and doom and freedom and geography and metaphysics and aging and angelic power. All of this type of thinking was in his last corpus of notes he was writing. And that is what Carl Hostetter gave us. This is Tolkien without the mystic veil. This is Tolkien as metaphysician, in other words. So if you love roots, if you love late philology, which I do, we are building a sound matrix of Arda with this type of material. This volume contains critical lab notes on Elvish aging and growth, the exact rates of mind maturity and body maturity. Elves grow differently from men. It talks about the incarnation of Theia, our spirit, and Hroa, the body. This is the metaphysics of soul versus body with precision. And we learn about the reincarnation of elves. Not just, yes, they reincarnate, but how the Valar reconstruct bodies. It's in this book. It's fascinating. Language drift. We learn all about the sounds, the phonological notes on Beleriandic to Sindarin. From Quenya vowel shifts to conceptual evolution, how and why Sindarin becomes aristocratic language instead of the earlier Adunaic transformation and politics of speech. This is the Numenorian language policy. This is root system fuel for us. It's pure theology, morality, and metaphysics. This is the book where Tolkien finally answers, what is free will in Arda? Why is death a gift to men? What is holiness for the Eldar? What is evil actually, not just Sauron drama? Why do the Valar not dominate this story? He writes like a Catholic metaphysicist, philologist, Platonic scholar, trying to fit eternity into grammar. And he gives us the single most fantastic fantasy story in existence. This is phenomenal. This is the closest that Tolkien ever comes to Summa Arda Logica. You will hear Aquinas, Augustine, Boethius, Maximus the Confessor, but what we're going to hear it in is in Tengwar ink, not Christian ink. So the biology of elves, and I do mean actual biology, we'll learn all about them in this book as well. Tolkien writes late era pseudo-anthropology, the conception cycles of elves, the gestation versus the Theia descent, how aging slows but it never stagnates. We learn why elves are vulnerable psychologically more than physically. We learn why orcs are broken in Theia-Hroa harmony. This is where you see the moral physiology of Middle-earth. Evil is considered as more of a disintegration of being, not villain mustache twirl. We learn about politics, kingship, and power. He writes explicitly on Numenorian and imperial expansion, tax, tribute, land rights, ethnic tension, why language policy equals moral identity, why Aragorn is not a medieval feudal monarch, but a sacramental king. Items like this that are so intriguing for our story. You'll see more clearly why Denethor collapses. Not because he is bad, but because Numenorian memory without divine orientation becomes self-aggrandizing despair. We'll see that. This helps us understand not only the physical characteristics of the characters, but the psychological, the spiritual. It's an astonishing array of vastness that we didn't originally ponder, that we didn't really originally realize, that has now come out, and it helps us reappreciate the story yet again. Every single time we go through this, we get spiritually charged, we get psychologically motivated, and we get satisfied philosophically, theologically, spiritually, economically. It's a beautiful thing that happens. Even Costco fits with this stuff. You think I'm kidding, right? Listen. Tolkien's model of stewardship versus domination is how not to buy 92 chicken breasts because they were a good deal. No. Elven life is moderation. It's about craft, continuity, intentionality. Dwarven life is build, accumulate, preserve, but don't fall into gold sickness. The Hobbit life is local, it's simple, it's convivial, and it's non-hoarding. Tolkien gives you a mythic ethics of budgetary wisdom. If you buy it, use it. If you store it with care. If you hoard it, check your fea, your spirit. Middle Earth is Costco compatible if you shop like a hobbit and not a dragon. And so this is basically my overview real quick of the nature of Middle Earth. There is so much more that I will share as time gives me, but understand that I'm thrilled to be a part of the Tolkien wave of love. Love of life, love of other, love of self. Now, the way we learn this is not through just all peace and goodness and cheer and grace. Not by a long shot. The evil, the darkness is brutally terrifying in Tolkien. And he made it that way for real, for a reason, because it matches what Aristotle, what Thomas Aquinas, and other great theologians throughout history, and now Tolkien has given us the real nature of the metaphysical darkness. And the really good news is the eucatastrophe, that sudden appearance of joy, because of the actual real nature and reality of the light and the interaction between the light and the dark, and how they coexist, and how it all works within our own lives. This is the pure and true beautiful power of J.R.R. Tolkien's magnificent epic. And I'm going to bring forward an enormous amount of material for you to ponder, to enjoy, to read, to say, oh, I hadn't thought of that before, etc. Because this helps us live better. And I love that. I love that. Not without challenge, not without failure. Everyone's going to fail. We all trip, stumble, fall. Some of us fall pretty cotton picking far. But the eucatastrophe is what actually turns the tide, and this happens to everyone eventually, one way or the other, whether in the Fea or in the Hroa. And this is what makes Tolkien so very valuable. So I'm looking forward to sharing much more Tolkien material with you. I appreciate all of your support. Hit the like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell, because I'm going to be kicking out more of J.R.R. Tolkien in my esoteric studies, because this is really, truly the capstone of the esoteric through the hero's journey, through the adventure, through the horror, through the darkness, through the mist, through the sunshine, through the light, through the friendship, through the betrayal, through the death, and through the life of it all. J.R.R. Tolkien gives us the entire complete package, and it's overwhelmingly beautiful and very delicious to enjoy. Thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Esoteric Studies.